from all the stuff that is happening currently. So thanks all for joining us. We're going to be going through a little bit about what Cerebrate is in the first place, and then show an example of a specific use case that we want to show you about how to find the correct recipients of information sharing within the CSIRT network. So it's going to be a rather short session, especially with such a small group. So we don't want to keep you all longer than necessary. So with that said, if you have any questions at any point, or you see any type of topic that you might be interested in that we're not covering, just let us know and we'll dive into that as well. I mean, with such a small group, it's easy to do. So let's get started a little bit. So for those of you that don't know about Cerebrate at all, or haven't been following the previous presentations we did on that, basically what we're going to be doing here is we're going to just explain quickly what the tool does, why we're working on this, what sort of benefits you should expect from it if you're doing information sharing via NISP, and where we're headed in the end, and what we're working on currently, as well as followed by, first of all, a demonstration of how this works. And we're going to look at the interface and see how the different things are actually done in the system, followed by the small exercise that you're all welcome to try as well. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, just a side note. So you might have noticed that this training is currently recorded. If you have questions that you want to ask that should not be recorded, we can answer them out of band later on. So you can private message us if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit about what the tool is in the first place. So first of all, it's an open source tool that is meant to solve several types of issues that we have out there. And we're building it as part of the Metadata project. So it is one of the main core components of the project. It's a project that is basically meant to bring common tooling and methodologies to CSIRTs within the CSIRT network. With that said, Cerebrate also is an open source tool on its own that is also meant to be used in other circumstances as well. So first and foremost, it's a community management and orchestration tool. That means that we're trying to solve those issues that we've seen over the years pop up with within different sharing communities that we're part of, where finding the right contacts, having enough information about the contacts that you're sharing with can be difficult, especially in a distributed setting where you're dealing with a larger network. We constantly had issues in some MISP communities where organizations were worried about who they're sharing with. They wanted to have more information about organizations. They wanted to be able to find how to get in touch with those organizations if they wanted to ask something out of band. So these type of issues are something that we want to resolve with Cerebrate. On top of that, we have a bunch of different tools that we're using internally that we have interconnected, and that we also partially interconnect with our partners. So that means that if we wanted to exchange information with other CSIRTs, we would go through MISP, for example, to exchange threat information, or if you wanted to exchange the tickets, then perhaps we would hook up a ticketing system where we would have the possibility to send tickets to other recipients within the community. Now, all of these interconnections between our tools and the management of these tools is quite a heavy burden, especially for a newcomer team, for example, that starts from scratch. Setting up a bunch of different tools and configuring them, and then also interconnecting them with their partners can be a chore. If any of you have managed a larger MISP instance before, you know that can also be quite time-consuming when it comes to managing synchronization connections, user enrollment, and so on. So the other thing that we wanted to solve with Cerebrate was basically this aspect of instance management for our different tools, as well as the orchestration and fleet management of our various different tools. Now, with that said, our first and primary goal when it comes to interaction is interconnecting Cerebrate with various open source tools. So we're going to talk a little bit about the integration layer and our plans for it, but we're also open to integrating with closed source applications in the future, and we want to make it also open for teams that use proprietary tools. Also, as a side note here, for us, since we're kind of wearing two hats at Circle with both building Cerebrate and MISP from this toolbox, we want to basically have Cerebrate as the de facto tool for managing MISP communities. Next slide, please. So a little bit about some of the issues that we're trying to tackle in more detail. So when it comes to community management, there are different aspects of community management that we're going to try to solve as Cerebrate. So one of them is the one that I already mentioned. We're basically dealing with a host of organizations and individuals when you're exchanging information, being able to find the right recipients, being able to find information on groups of organizations, for example, that have a commonality, such as being able to share with all my partners from a certain country, from a certain sector, and so on, all parts of the contact database system, as well as building reusable distribution objects that we can use to share information with a set of recipients over time. So if you're used to using MISP, basically it's the exact same concept as sharing groups there with some slight modifications that we'll talk about. But the idea is the same. We basically take lists of organizations and use that as a label on our data so that our tools deliver the information to the right recipient. We also want to be able to exchange this information. So that means that if we have multiple communities interconnected with each other, we want to be able to replicate this information over to other communities. So that means that if we have information about the various organizations that are part of our community, we might want to share at least parts of that with other communities out there, so that they also get information about our contact details, about our public keys and so on that they might want and need to use in order to be able to communicate with us and to validate where their data is coming from. Now, especially for this latter part about validating the information, we have several projects ongoing that deal with cryptographic signing of information. So this is especially important when it comes to validating whether data has been tampered within a large distributed network of interconnected organizations. So even though the CSIRT network itself is a pretty close and tightly coupled group, we all do have contacts that we're receiving information from and other communities that we're receiving information from, and being able to validate that the information that we receive and then we propagate the CSIRT network, for example, is extremely important. Now, the solution to that still lies in the future. We will have one intermediary release for MISP, by the way. This is just a small side note here. That will partially tackle this issue, and that will be tied also to Cerebrate in being able to validate signing keys for information that is being shared. Now, this is on the community management side. There is one more thing that is missing from this list that Sammy will talk about a bit later today, which is the management of mailing lists. So communication doesn't just happen by sharing technical information, but also by actually sending out emails and communicating with your partners, and managing that can also be quite a nuisance on larger communities or communities that are bootstrapped quickly. So we're going to have a look at that as well. Now, as for the local tool management, what we call local tools in the context of Cerebrate, are tools that you basically have deployed in your CSIRT. So that means that, for example, just to list a few things that we have deployed in our premises, MISP for us is obviously one local tool. For example, for us, for managing issues and tickets, RTIR would be another tool like that. Then we could have, for example, tools such as IntelMQ and so on and so forth that we have deployed in our networks. And those would then also fall into the local tool category. Now, the idea is that a lot of these tools, first of all, can interconnect with partners from other CSIRTs and with the tools that they're running. So the orchestration of these interconnections is now handled through Cerebrate as well whenever there's integration module available for a given tool. Apart from that, sometimes we end up in a situation where out of these different local tools that we're running, we run a massive amount of them for different purposes. For example, in our case for MISP, we at Circle do run, I think, 24 or so MISP instances altogether, be it for managing different communities or for managing specific tasks that we have internally at the CSIRT. An example would be collection MISP instances that collect spam or the output of sandboxing and so on. Now, if you end up with a large network of these different tools, managing all of those one by one via their interfaces, configuration files, and so on can be tedious. So one of the things we try to do is also bring this under one umbrella, under Cerebrate, so that we can manage it from our interface. And then finally, we're basically feeding these tools with Cerebrate information. So if a tool can basically use information about organizations, about constituencies of organizations, signing keys, and so on, then being able to use Cerebrate as a lookup for a community is a handy resource. Next slide, please. So where are we today? So currently we are in the pilot phase. So that means we have a pilot instance running that is hosted at ENISA. Currently we just transitioned it to running Keycloak. So pretty much nobody has access to it now that did before. So if you're interested in having access, just ping us and we'll create an account for you there. And then in the later stages of the pilot, we'll enroll all the users that are in the network currently. But right now it's still ad hoc and it's a pilot release. With that said, the software itself is about to get its 1.5 release. So we've had one initial final release, followed by 5-point releases since then. And for us at Circle, we've used Cerebrate as a long-term project that we have big plans for in terms of where we want to take it in the future. So we have a lot of ideas still to implement, and it's going to take us quite some time to get to through everything that we have in mind and the ideas that we have for it. With that said, obviously, beyond many-services as well, the prioritization of features is always something that keeps getting reevaluated for us. So if you know us from how we develop MISP, it's the same idea. If we see that the community needs certain features, we jump to that usually. Now, in order for us to be able to do that, we need to hear from you. So if you have ideas or see something that is missing for you, let us know so that we know that we're going in the wrong direction and we need to course correct. If you want to get started and install your own Cerebrate instance, there's a link there. Just grab the latest release installation. Unlike MISP, it's super straightforward. So you should be up and running in a few minutes. So yeah, if you want to get involved in any other way, such as code improvements or just feature ideas and so on, just reach out to us, get involved on GitHub, and tell us what you're missing and why it's not working for you. Next slide, please. So let's have a very, very quick look at what's available right now. So this is just going to be a bullet point list, and we're going to rush through these, and then we're going to actually see it in action afterwards. So first of all, one of the things we're going to be looking at briefly is a set of common functionalities that govern Cerebrate, followed by the different subsystems within the contact database, sharing group management, as well as the interconnection from Cerebrate to Cerebrate, and then the mailing list management, and finally integration modules, inbox system, and the fleet management components. So those deal more with the module systems of Cerebrate. So next slide, please. So basically, when it comes to common functionalities, one of the things to understand before we get started with Cerebrate is that the way that we cluster users into groups works very similarly to MISP. So we've taken a lot of inspiration and a lot of code sharing between the two projects. So there will be a lot of very similar concepts to MISP. With that said, there are some differences as well that we're going to be talking about. But first and foremost, user management and access control on the data level works similarly to MISP. So we're organized in users into organizations or teams. that can self-manage and manage their own users via team reps or org admins, depending on nomenclature based on the community. And all of these different users that are within that organization are also coupled to the role-based access control system, where each of them can have a role assigned that basically decides what sort of features they can use. So just to recap this long explanation, organizations decide what data you can see and interact with, and roles decide what features you can use of the system. Now, one of the other things that is somewhat new compared to MISP is that we're kind of running in dual mode when it comes to user management. So you can use Cerebrate exactly like you would do MISP, where Cerebrate itself is your only source of information about users and user management. But we have a pretty tight integration with Keycloak additionally. So for the case of ENISA, in the future, and already on the pilot instance, all user management and authentication will happen through Keycloak. We're going to talk a little bit more about how this works in practice, but you can basically do some lightweight management of users from Cerebrate, and then Cerebrate instructs Keycloak for on user updates, but Keycloak is the authoritative source of information in the end. We also have a powerful API that stretches the entire application. So everything that you can do via the user interface, similar to MISP, you can also access through the API. So that means, be it from creating users, managing contact database information, or administering the local tools, all of this is exposed to the API, and you can automate those functionalities via scripts and external tools. Now, we're also going to have a quick look at some of the management tools available and how to manage your Cerebrate instance if you're an administrator, or if you just want to set up and test Cerebrate on your own server. Next slide, please. Now, for the contact database itself, it's, as mentioned before, it's basically an index of organizations and individuals, along with all of their metadata. Now, what sort of metadata goes into these objects can be refined further. So that means that we have a customizable system for metadata that uses a templating system, similarly to if you use this, for example, galaxies or objects, where you can build your own data model that is to be reused within a community. We have some predefined metadata libraries that are available already by default. So one is, for example, mapping the ENISA Teams directory with all the different fields that exist there. We also have one for the first database, and I think that's pretty much it, unless I'm mistaken, Sammy. Maybe I missed something.
We will go over these
okay, yeah, we'll
during the demo, but yeah, there is also one about constituency, where you can register as numbers, sectors, domains that you are have constituent. Same for CIDR blocks.
Yeah, and exactly what Sammy is mentioning here. So this is another thing that is rather new to Cerebrate, and it's coming in the upcoming version, but we're already going to be dealing with that during the exercise now. These metadata fields actually are somewhat more interactive than just string fields. They can have their own functionalities and search functionalities that allows you to do lookups against them. So we're going to see some examples also in the exercise, where we're going to have to find information about the constituency of some organizations. So we have these content-aware search functionalities that rely on the functionalities provided by the metadata system. We'll see that in action in a bit. Next slide, please. So quickly about sharing groups. Sharing groups in general are very similar to what MISP does. So if you've used sharing groups in MISP, it's almost the same thing with the simplification that you purely rely on organization lists rather than a mix of organizations and servers. So it's basically like the roaming mode sharing groups in MISP. The creation and management of all of the sharing groups happens through Cerebrate. And then MISP can use Cerebrate as a source of sharing group backend, basically, to ingest and to share data based on the sharing groups that were created by the Cerebrate community. Next slide, please. So as for synchronization, very similar to MISP again. So Cerebrates themselves can interconnect with other Cerebrate instances, diagnose issues with the connectivity, remotely browse data from the other Cerebrate instances, and finally fetch and ingest data from the other instances. So it's pretty straightforward. We can move on to the next slide. Now, on top of that part for synchronization, there is one thing that I didn't really mention in the previous slide. We also have the integration module system that allows us to integrate Cerebrate with our various different local tools. Now, all of this happens through standalone libraries that can be dropped in your Cerebrate directory. So building new integrations with other tools is rather straightforward. We'll see some examples later on how that actually works in practice. But the idea is to be able to manage the different tools, to feed the tool with contact information, as well as to orchestrate those interconnections with the other tools. So that means if I, as Circle, wanted to interconnect with CERT Austria, for example, and I see that both of us are running MISP instances, Cerebrate will reveal this to us if we decide to share this information with it. And then Cerebrate will propose that we interconnect our instances with each other so that we can start exchanging information. And if both parties agree, then we can go for it. There's a question about if OpenCTI integration is foreseen. We haven't really looked at that, but if anyone is willing to work on that, perhaps the team behind OpenCTI, we did send them an invite at one point, but we haven't heard any feedback from them for a workshop where we were walking organizations and users through the integration suite. So if they're willing to work on that, that would be interesting. So it's basically open to anyone. But from our side, we don't use OpenCTI, so I don't know the tool, to be honest.
If I may, for OpenCTI, I don't know if the tool actually can connect to other OpenCTI instances and share data.
I think it can, yes. Well,
okay.
it can do taxi as far as I know. So I guess taxi orchestration could work. I don't know.
Yeah, that needs to be discussed with
exactly.
the guy.
Exactly. That's basically it for the introduction part. Before we move on, any questions so far? Before we look at the tool itself? No?
In the meantime, maybe I can quickly show. So this is linked to the integration module. So what is currently displayed on the screen is the Git repository where we will store the additional module connection that can be integrated in Cerebrate. And we already started creating documentation about how you can create such module, how you can deploy them. So that you can have also your own set of modules instead of the default one shipped by default with the software. I'm not sure if it's relevant or not to show a sample of such interconnection module, but as we are a small group, maybe that I can quickly go over it, not the code itself, but just to explain that basically whenever you create a connector module, you define the function that you want to be exposed to Cerebrate, the settings that can be used for this connector, and then for each function, you can also describe how it interfaces with the Cerebrate instance. So whenever you are browsing this connection module, you can have, for example, a list of data that are contained inside the remote tool. But we will see an example for this.
Yeah, indeed. So let's jump over to the instance. And there was also a question in the chat in the meanwhile whether we're planning on if you're already adding CIDR and AS information in Cerebrate, whether we're planning to use to integrate it with IntelliQ And yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of our targets for that, and that was one of the ideas also behind including that with some discussions with CERT and what they need as well.
Yeah, so just that I expand a bit on this. So right now in Cerebrate, we have the possibility to save the different AS numbers and CIDR blocks as part of an organization metadata. And you can already search for this information via the API or the interface. Now with the integration with CTLMQ, the idea is to have a kind of microservices that we would have in Cerebrate, similar to what we have in MISP with MISP modules, where you could also perform additional searches.
Okay.
But absolutely, that need to be discussed on
exactly.
on how to do it.
Yeah, Luciano is already discussing that.
Yeah, cool.
So moving on, when you log into the instance, this is what you're going to be seeing when you first log in. So it's basically a dashboard that shows the different types of objects that exist in the system and their evolution over time. Now here you can already start doing some searches against the data set and be able to do lookups in a more generic way. So if I have a string and just want to quickly search for that, I can already do it from this interface. But apart from that, it just gives you an idea of the activity on your instance. So this is basically one of our own internal instances. Oops, like that.
Oops. Oops.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so keep in mind, this is an instance that we run internally for just showing things off at the office when we're developing it on Cerebrate. So it basically doesn't have any real data or usage. So you can see it on the charts that Sami just quickly imported a lot of data so that we can do the exercise. But other than that, it's completely unused. With that said, some of the concepts that you're going to be seeing will be familiar from MISP, so we try to keep it at least somewhat familiar. But with that said, it's obviously quite reworked how we interact with the tool. As a small side note on that, MISP will be moving in that direction in the future too. So our plan is to basically transition MISP into this same framework and code base that is under the hood for Cerebrate. So let's have a quick look at some of the different concepts and functionalities of the tool. So first of all, perhaps the best way to start is to have a look at the contact database level items. So let's look at the organizations first, perhaps. So again, very similar to how MISP works. Each of these lines that you see here is an organization. Similarly to MISP, we assign a UUID to any organization, and these are supposed to carry over from instance to instance. So that means that if you have MISP instances, different Cerebrate nodes, the UUIDs should be de facto UUIDs for a given organization. It's not the case on this particular instance, as this is mostly just junk data that was ingested. But for the final one that we're going to be setting up for an ESI, it will be different. Now, each of these organizations can also have a lot of metadata that is not shown on this view itself. But you can click on the little eye icon to get to the more detailed view, and here you get a lot more information. So here you get access to all those meta fields that we already mentioned. So on top you have the basic data fields that are also mostly visible on the index, along with the individuals that are aligned with this organization. We'll talk about that in a minute. And below we see all the meta fields coming from different libraries. So the first one that is currently highlighted is the ANISA library. So maybe we can look a bit more at that. Here you can see the different fields that are coming from the ANISA API that were extracted from there. So membership informations, CSIRT network status, some information about contact information for the organization and so on. And at the same time, you have access to all the other metadata from the other libraries that we ingested. So from the first directory, and finally the CSIRT constituency library, which includes, in this case, a small sample of how it works, basically showing that IPv4 blocks, for example, can be assigned to an organization, or AS numbers and so on. Okay. Now, besides that, the thing that we didn't talk about yet too much is the alignments. We also have this concept that individuals that are that exist in Cerebrate. So these are basically descriptions of a person, can be linked to one or multiple organizations. But this is somewhat different from the concepts that we had in MISP. We realize that in some cases, some of us are linked to more than one organization. So if you have a contact information of a person that is linked to an organization via their day job, via some additional work that they do for some other organizations, or the teams that they're part of in the research during the evenings, then you can describe all of these and model all of these in Cerebrate. Additionally to that, when we look at individuals, they work very similarly to organizations in that they also have their own metadata that you can assign to individual entries. Now here we don't have any that are enabled in this instance, but it would work the exact same way, where you can have custom libraries with metadata fields that can be populated for each of those users. Now, going back to the organizations, perhaps, the thing with this list is that it's managed in one of two ways. One, you can create and modify them directly here on this instance, or you can just exchange them with other instances, pull them in from MISP instances, and so on and so forth. So it's so basically the idea is to have a de facto list of all your contacts at organizations that is known to your community in one place. Something interesting here besides that is that you can also flip Cerebrate over into another mode. It's still kind of an experimental state, but we're going to be working on that in the near future, where you can offer a public lookup of each of the organizations and individuals. So this is a completely opt-in system. We will not do it for the ENISA instance, but we will, for example, probably do it on the Circle instance in the future. Now, the advantage of that is if you offer public lookup for organizations, for example, in your communities, then you can validate things such as organization UUIDs and signing keys by a broader constituency out there. So it means that if you're interacting with different communities, sharing data with different communities, once we get cryptographic signing for data being shared, then those other communities can basically talk back to your Cerebrate to get signing keys to validate the data. Okay, now moving on, let's have a quick look at searching. Maybe you want to take that, Sana?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so but maybe before we talk about searches, you already talked a lot about metafield, but I would like to expand a bit on that. So to explain how we handle it in Cerebrate. So let's jump to add-ons, then metafield templates. So this is the interface that lists all the meta templates that are available. You can see that you can have some based on the scope. So for example, for organization, we've talked about the ENISA CSIRT network inventory. So this template is actually the one that is used to encode information for each organization related to the ENISA inventory. But we can have more. So as we saw, for example, the CSIRT constituency that could contain IPv4 addresses. Yeah, you can see that we have multiple templates. So these templates, similar to what we have in MISP, again, we borrow a lot of concepts from MISP because we see that it works quite well. All of these are coming also from a repository. So I'm just showing on the screen what it looks like. So basically, it's like a MISP object template for those who are familiar with it. So you just describe what a metafield is. So for example, I don't know, the website here. You provide the type. So in the current version, in the current release version of Cerebrate, you only support the type text, but for the next one, so 1.5, we will also support IPv4 and IPv6. I will explain the nuance in a second. And then you can also provide some validation regex. So this is more to validate the data to be sure that you have as a value what this meta field expects. Yeah, and then a bit of meta information about this meta field. So we keep track of the evolution of these meta templates. That's why we have a versioning system also, meaning that if you notice that we are missing some fields in this meta template, or we want to relax or to improve the regex of a specific field, we can modify it, and then we'll have also to update it in Cerebrate. So right now we don't have anything up to date. Well, everything is up to date. We don't have any update pending for a meta template, but we can see that Cerebrate notifies us that there are 2 templates that are on disk that haven't been ingested by the application yet. So that's just a side note for that. Now to come back to the type that we have here. So by default, everything is on text, meaning that you can do searches, text searches, such as substrings and full text searches. But for these specific ones, in addition to being able to search for just substring or the exact value, the exact textual value of the field, you can also search for IP contained inside of blocks. So in that case, we saw for the circle organization that we have here in the IPv4 address, that is actually an IP range. And if we were to search for a specific IP address with a /32, for example, the Cerebrate would be able to search correctly and realize that the IP we are searching for is actually included in this CIDR block. So type are not just how we validate the data, it also allows us to have custom finders and to add more logic to how we manipulate and search for this specific data. So right now in the next version, so 1.5, we'll only have these 2, but we already have set the ground for more types. Okay, so to continue on what Andras suggested, so the search, we have multiple ways to search for information in Cerebrate. So you can search using this global search tool. It will basically do a full text search on the whole application. So if I were to search, for example, for circle, it will provide me information about, for example, this organization. This one is also returned because you have the subword circle. So you can also notice that it's doing a substring search. This is individual because they're also linked to this one. And it also searches search on meta fields. But to expand on that, if you already know what you are looking for example, an organization, if you want to search for circles, for circle, you can do it like this. It's also a substring search. But in some case, you want to be even more precise to explicitly say in what data point you want the search to be performed. So to do that, you have also access to this filtering tool. If you click on it, you can supply exactly on which data point you want the value to be searched, for example, in that case, for the name of the organization. But you can also provide searches for meta fields, explicitly say for meta field. So if we look at circle, we see that you want to know, well, you want to have all the organization that have the country name Luxembourg. You could do that, then search for country name, and then paste the value here, and it will return the data if I pick the correct template. I didn't pick the correct template, of course. Oops. There we go. Yep. So to come back to the IPv4 and IPv6 types, if you want to search for the specific, if a specific IP address is contained inside a CIDR block, what you will have to use right now is to use this filtering interface and select the IPv4 address. And then you can provide the IP address that you want to search for. The reason why we don't use this custom finder method in the whole text search is for performance reason. We might reconsider it at some point. For example, to provide a small button that you can click on it to actually use this custom finder, this custom IPv4 finder in this interface. But right now we don't do it just for performance reasons. So if you want to search for CIDR block inclusion, please use this one, this search interface, pick the meta field, the correct meta field template you want to search for, and then add the IP address. I think I cover everything for searches. Now that I'm on the table, maybe I can also expand a bit on the interface. So we can see that Circle has a lot of meta information attached to the organization, and sometimes you want to have this information displayed also on the main table. So Cerebrate also allows you to do that. If you click on this small button, you have access to option for this specific column that you can show. So you can decide, for example, to hide the UID of an organization, but you can also explicitly ask to have, for example, the IPv4 of this organization displayed. Same goes for example, for, I don't know, is approved field. And so now it tells us that we need to reload the table to have this information displayed. And you can see that we have the meta information displayed. So we don't have anything here because I picked the wrong template once again. I will quickly pick the correct one. Just really meta. Oops. That's it. There we go. So now the question, why do we have multiple templates? So let's go back once again to our meta field template index. So we are currently viewing all, not all actually, meta templates available. We are only seeing the latest meta templates. If we click on all, you can see that we have this meta template twice. So the first version and the second version. So the reason why we have it, and I keep it as is so that you can also have an example on how you can manipulate different fields and different entities having old meta template, is that in the system we have both, and it tells us that some meta field could be moved to the newest version of the meta template. So if we click on this, it lists all the entities that can be moved. And if you remember, when you look at an organization, you can see that for this ENISA CSIRT network version 1 template, it tells us that this information is under an outdated template and that we have a new template that is already known by the system, and it allows us to migrate to this version. So if we click on this button, we have a migration interface where most of the things that can be moved automatically without conflict are moved. And if you're happy with it, you can just click on update to version and it will migrate the Circle organization meta template version 1 to the version 2.
Okay, so should we move on to the next part because we're running a bit low on time?
Yes. That's
so moving on quickly, let's look at users and how user interaction works in Cerebrate, and this can be really confusing at first. So users and individuals are two distinct things in Cerebrate. Basically, if you want to think about it, think of it this way: individuals are information about the person, while users manages the access control in Cerebrate itself. All users will be tied to an individual, but not all individuals will have a user object. So the user objects that you see here in the index actually take data from both the user object itself, as well as some data fields from the individual. So email address, first name, last name all belong to the coupled individual. And username and organization and role are actually tied to the user object itself. So as you can see here, what we discussed before, each user is assigned to both an organization controlling what data they have access to, what data they can modify, as well as a role that defines what sort of actions they can trigger in the system, what functionalities they have access to. So besides that, it's very straightforward. There are no metadata fields here. All the metadata you want to encapsulate about the user has to go into the individual that is assigned to them. So that's just a small side note here. Now, going back to the users, the thing that with each user, so they do have some child objects that belong to a user. So if you view an individual user, so if you just click on the first one or yours, yeah, whatever, you can see that below, you see there are 3 types of objects that are tied to the user. Authentication keys are the keys that we use to authenticate via the API with the system. So each of the users can have multiple API keys. So you can create API keys, for example, for different use cases with different expirations and so on and so forth. Now, encryption keys are a different story. They're used to basically sign and encrypt emails, for example, and to validate the data that the users produce. So each user could have a set of encryption keys assigned to them. And those would then be used for all these different systems. User settings control what sort of configurations the user has for the system itself. This can be from something as simple as managing what columns you can see on the indexes, what Sami has already shown us, or it can be settings like theming of the system. And then later on, we will also introduce some other services that need configuration through Cerebrate as well. So this is basically users in a nutshell. We probably shouldn't go into much more depth in that. Maybe one thing, and that is basically the integration with Keycloak. When we talk about different user roles, there is a special type of role that we will call TNAP for the CSIRT network, but generally in the tool it's called an org admin. These are basically roles that can manage their own team. So in the scope of CSIRT network, this will mean one single appointed person per organization that can enroll new users. So if you're logged in with a sync user, an org admin account, you can add additional users for your own organization. Now, whenever you add a user, in the case of CSIRT network, this will automatically enroll them also in Keycloak. Okay, now if we quickly look at the roles, what roles exist and how they work. These are basically roles are basically matrices of different user permissions. Right now, we don't have that many different permissions in Cerebrate yet. It's an extendable system that we will keep expanding on whenever we have new functionalities where we want to have more granular controls over who has access to it. Right now, as a quick explanation, full admins are basically site administrators. They're not meant to be users of the system, but service accounts. Organization admins are those team reps. So if you create a role with just the organization admin flag, then they will be able to create and manage their own users. And sync permissions are for special automation users that are to be used to interconnect different Cerebrate instances with each other to exchange information. And finally, you can select the default role that will be the default selection whenever you create a new user. Okay, that's basically it for users and roles. So let's move on quickly to sharing groups. So if you're used to sharing groups from MISP, this will be a bit repetitive. It works exactly the same way, basically, besides it being a bit simplified by just being a list of organizations. The idea is if I wanted to exchange information, for example, with everyone in the Benelux states, I would create a sharing group that involves all the organizations from the Benelux CSIRTs, for example. Now, the idea behind sharing groups is kind of two things. One, we want to communicate intent who do we want to share information with. So this is this first form that we see here when we create the sharing group itself. This is where releasability and description are important so that this is understood within the community who you're sharing with. And let's just quickly create something. And then we can start populating it with the actual machine parsable data, which is a list of organizations. So here we see the organization list. We can start adding members to the list. So these are taken from our contact database. So we see the list of organizations there, and we can start adding the ones that are supposed to be members of the sharing group. If we're happy with the list, we can start using it immediately. We can tell our MISP to ingest the sharing group and start sharing information with the organizations in the list. Now, this is something that we'll also be doing during the exercise. So we'll get back to that during the exercise itself. Now, just very quickly, because we're running really low on time, quickly let's have a look at local tools just to show how it works, but we're not going to use it for the exercise part now. Basically, the idea with local tool connectors is that we can connect to a set of different tools. Right now, we only have one connector module here, which is the MISP connector, and we see that we have one actual connection to a MISP instance, to the Glochka.eu instance as a training instance we normally use for MISP. So let's have a look at that. So let's look at our connection. And here we can see that we are interconnected with the Glochka.eu instance, and we have access to a bunch of different functionalities at the bottom. So these are all coming from that integration module that Sammy has shown. For example, we could manage the different settings of the server directly from this interface via the server settings. Or we can view the different interconnected servers that we're connected to from that instance, or view the different organizations and users of the instance, and also ingest those. So if we see an organization here that we're missing currently on our CERT, we can just directly pull that in and create an equivalent copy of that in Cerebrate. Same thing with sharing groups, for example. Okay, so that's basically it quickly for the integration. For the synchronization, I don't know if we have synchronization links set up on this instance. We probably don't. Oh, we do. Okay, that's perfect. We can use that on the Glochka one just to quickly show it. So this is a Cerebrate to Cerebrate connection. We can do the same with other Cerebrate instances. So we can browse and exchange information with other Cerebrate nodes. So if you are interconnected with another community and you want to find contacts on that from within that other community, you can do it here, and you can pull in their contact data directly into your instance. There we go. Yeah. So now we pulled in an individual from the remote instance. We can also use this to interconnect our tools with the other side. I don't know if we have any tools configured on this one. Let's just have a quick look.
I don't think so.
No, we probably don't. Yeah,
we
don't have anything configured. But basically, just to quickly explain how this would work, if you have a MISP connected locally to your Cerebrate instance and your partners do as well, and you both decide to announce it to the community that you have a MISP instance via Cerebrate, it's a setting when you encode the connection, then we would see that in that list that Sammy has shown a moment ago, and you could initiate a dialogue with the other instance to exchange credentials and to hook up our MISP instances with each other. Now, the entire process that normally takes quite a few steps and a lot of manual work to get the interconnection going between our tools is then completely handled by Cerebrate's inbox system. So that means if I decide to ask for a connection request from a partner, I just do it with 2 clicks from this interface. My partner will receive an inbox item in their Cerebrate that will basically say, well, Circle has now asked you to interconnect this MISP instance with this MISP instance of yours. Do you accept? And if they accept as well, then the ball is back in the initiator's court. And they can then, they receive another message in their inbox that they can finalize the connection, and then everything is configured. Sync users are created on both sides. Synchronization links are added, and everything is configured automatically by the tool. Okay, so very quickly, besides local tools and sync, quickly about instance management. So just a 3-minute intro in that. Basically, if you set up your Cerebrate instance, you have tools that help you with configuring and managing your instance. So we have a dashboard for the instance configuration. So server settings, there we go. that basically identify issues with your settings and allow you to modify all the relevant settings in each of those forms there. So here, if you wanted to set up keycloak, for example, you could do it through this interface. Same thing with security settings or application-specific settings. Okay. As for auditing, everything that you do in Cerebrate, especially that creates or modifies data, gets logged. So if you're an administrator of the system, you can browse and see what sort of requests your users are throwing at the system. Foul play such as potential brute forcing or attempted and failed logins and so on will also be logged here. This is, of course, API exposed as well, so you can also build scripts that monitor your Cerebrate logs for all of these actions. And finally, for updates, if you want to update your Cerebrate instance, just run a git pull in your Cerebrate directory, and then come to this interface here. So this is the migration index. If there are any migration scripts to run, you will get a button that basically says, tells you to run it. And then the system will execute the upgrade scripts from this interface directly. You can also monitor the outcomes of the update scripts. So here we see that all of them are up and all of the updates have been applied. So that's basically it. And now we can move over to the exercise. So Sami, if you want to take over.
Yeah, I just have one final comment regarding the local tool interconnection, because we didn't have the opportunity to show it live. So I will paste in the chat a small presentation that shows you the different steps that one could make to interconnect two MISP instances via Cerebrate. So you can see just, but there are just like buttons to click. On one side, you have like 4 buttons to click, and on the other 3. And that's basically it. You will have your two MISP instances connected. Okay, now for the exercise. So do we have it in the Edge doc? We have on information about the connection. So if you go into the Edge doc, you have a section called exercise, and it gives you credential to access the Cerebrate training instance. So this instance that we are currently showing. So if you want to do it yourself, instead of waiting for us to show you the complete exercise, you can go ahead, pick a username between training 1 to training 10. The password is password 1234 with uppercase P, so that you can already log into the platform. Now for the exercise, the idea is for you coming from a MISP event is to find the IP addresses, well, the contact point of these IP of CERT that are responsible for these IP addresses, and request them to take them down actually. So the event I'm talking about, I will paste it in the chat. It's basically located on also our MISP training instance that we have here.
Just a small side note, we also need access to the MISP instance for that. So I put the credentials in there.
Okay, thanks. Just to show it on screen. So this is the event in question. So it's basically, well, just a side note, everything that is being encoded on MISP, but as well also on Cerebrate, is synthetic data. So this is all fake and just for the purpose of this exercise. But to come back to the event, this is a typical spear phishing attempt on a specific sector. You can see that we have good contextualization on this event. And it contains URLs, payloads, email information coming from this spear phishing. And if you look a bit, we can see that we have IP addresses. For example, this one, this evil provider. So this URL is actually serving a malicious payload. And your task here is to find a point of contact of this IP address only using Cerebrate, because typically you would use like who is an NS lookup to find this contact information. But for the purpose of this exercise is to use Cerebrate. So to go into the organization page and find which organization have a CIDR block containing this IP address. I will also paste in the Edge doc all the steps for this exercise so that it's easier for everyone. There we go. Oops. Okay. So once you find all the organization in Cerebrate, you will find 3 of them. The idea is to create a sharing group in Cerebrate itself. So you will have to go in the sharing group page, create a new sharing group, include these 3 organizations in it. And once that's done, the idea is also to come back to MISP, pull this sharing group information so that you can start sharing information with these 3 organizations. So to pull a sharing group from a Cerebrate instance, if you don't know it yet, it's under Sync Action, and then Cerebrate. And of course, I'm logged out. There we go. And so you can see our Cerebrate instance here. And if you explore it, you can view details about the sharing groups. So if you created a sharing group in Cerebrate, it will appear here, and you just have to download it. And once that's done, it will be to create an extended event for that spear phishing event that will contain the IP addresses that you want to take down. And this extended event obviously will have its distribution level set to the sharing group you just created in Cerebrate. Okay, so I see that Andras already pasted information on how to log into the MISP training instance. That's perfect. So first step, find the IP addresses containing this event and search which organization have CIDR blocks containing these IP addresses in Cerebrate. So should we say like we let you 2 to 5 minutes? What do you say, Andras?
It sounds good.
Mm-hmm. And then into, let's say like 3 minutes, so that we have the time to complete the whole exercise before the end of meeting. And so in like 3 minutes, we'll do every step, like step 1, and then give you more time to do step 2, and then we'll show it live. Okay, so let's see if we have some participation, I will say. So let's see if someone already created a sharing group. Cool. Someone created a sharing group and added an organization. That's nice. So you can continue, whoever it is, but I will show the steps that was expected. So from this event, we had multiple IP addresses, such as this one. So the idea was to just take it, copy it, then go to the organization index. And now you have multiple ways to do it. So you could either start to put it like this. As an organization, if you remember for the circle one, for example, we have a CIDR block. It doesn't contain the whole IP. So if we try to search directly for the for this value, this will not work because it's not contained as a strict text as is in the organization. But if we search, for example, for a substring, in that case, we might have a result for this one. So we can see that if we search for a part of this string, we have it. So for example, if we do 24, we'll still have it. But if we include, like, for example, this one, we'll not have it because there is no match. Another way to do it would have been to use directly this the specific data point search. So in that case, we are looking for the IPv4 address. As IPv4 address, this meta field support a custom finder, as I said previously. So it will use a special way to search for the data provided here. So if I do that, it will actually search for the inclusion inside all CIDR blocks of meta field of type IPv4. In our case, we have the result if we do it like this. So we could also have used this global search one, but again, it's the same story as for the substring search. You could just start typing a part of the IP to search for, and then you would have a result. So obviously, if we don't have much data, this one is maybe the fastest and easiest, just to paste part of the value. But if we have a lot of data and you want more precision, the best would be to use this special finder. Okay, so I see we have only 15 minutes left. So I propose that I proceed with the whole exercise, because since we took so long to explain and to demo the whole application, so let's proceed. But if you want to redo this exercise later on, the instance will be still accessible, so you can do and play with it again later on during the week. So the next step was to search actually for all the three organizations. So we had, so we found Circle in the first one. If we search for this other IP address, so I will use the shortcut to just use for a substring. We see that we find CERT Polska. And the last one, the last IP address containing the event is actually CERT 80. And so the idea was to create a sharing group out of these three organizations. So to do this, you go in sharing group, add sharing group, and then we'll call it, I don't know, our test sharing group. Or even better, the idea is that this sharing group will be used to take down the IP addresses. We can left description empty. Confirm. Now we have our sharing group. And now the idea is to include these three organizations to the sharing group. So the first one was Circle. The second one was CERT Polska. And the last one was CERT. Okay, now that we have our sharing group, the idea was to have it to have this sharing group in MISP. So to come back to MISP, if you're familiar with MISP, and especially the integration with Cerebrate, you can go in Synchronization and then Cerebrate. Then you can explore it. And if you click on sharing group, you will see the two sharing groups that have been created on the Cerebrate instance. So we can see here the sharing group created by one of the participants, and this is our sharing group. So to download it in MISP, you just click on this fetch sharing group object. Now, the next step was to create an extended event containing the IP to be taken down by the organization of this sharing group. So we will come back to our initial event. Now, there are two ways to do it. So either you create a new event and you encode the IP addresses that you want to take down, or even better, you can create what we call an extended event, so that we keep a link to this original event from which the data was coming from. So that's what I will do. I will create an extended event. And in our case, I will call it IPs to take down. Distribution, we will take the sharing group that we just downloaded. So what was the name again? It was sharing group for takedown. Sharing group for takedown. There we go. We have our event. And the last step was to just encode the IP addresses to be taken down. So these are the IP addresses. So I will use the free text import tool so I can paste them all in one shot. Network activity, IP test, that's good. Submit. And last but not least, oops, explicitly request just add a TLP tag. Explicitly request that these IPs must be taken down using a taxonomy. So we have a malware an adversary, taxonomy, especially for that. It contains a lot of a lot of action that you could ask for others to do on a specific infrastructure. So for example, you could specify that you only want passive action only to be performed on this infrastructure, or for example, in our case, that we want to take it down. And that's basically it.
So perfect. So I think that pretty much wraps up what we had in mind. Perhaps something to do before we wrap the session off. We still have a few minutes. Is kind of an open discussion. So if you have ideas on what we can do, how we can do it better, based on what you've seen today, we're already interested in that. And if you don't want to say anything now, that's fine too. Just let us know whenever you have ideas. So any questions or anything that you in particular want to see, or ideas? If no, then I think we can. Oh, there is a question, I think. No, sorry, that was something you answered already. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, if you have any questions, just ping us on Mattermost anytime or via email, and we're happy to answer it and help you out. And we'll keep the instance running, as Sami said. So if you want to keep playing with the two instances, just feel free to do so. So thank you all for stopping by, especially with the mess that's going on now. And see you around.